Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Wednesday, 13th August 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. United States, riding a wave of optimism, fueled by steady inflation data and hopes for Federal Reserve rate cuts, the U.S. stock market is rallying, with the S&P 500 and Nasdaq hitting record highs. While this surge is contributing to a global market upswing, some traders are wary of potential tariff impacts. Accuses is investing $3 billion to shift production of refrigerators, gas ranges, and water heaters from China and Mexico to the U.S., expanding domestic operations. A startup Perplexity is reportedly considering acquiring Google's Chrome browser amidst ongoing antitrust scrutiny of Google. Scotiabank is implementing layoffs in its U.S. and Asia-Pacific investment banking divisions. Anticipation surrounds the upcoming summit between the U.S. and Russia, with investors worldwide closely monitoring developments. Russia. As a summit between President Vladimir Putin and former US President Donald Trump looms, Russia anticipates potential benefits with minimal downsides. Russia accuses Kyiv of escalating attacks in the lead-up to the summit. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is scheduled to meet with Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar in Moscow on August 21st. Economically, Russia faces headwinds as its war chest dwindles due to sanctions and reduced oil purchases from India, with increasing reports of hidden unemployment as the economy transitions away from a wartime footing. Russia is also seeking to tighten control over messaging apps like Telegram and WhatsApp, citing violations of Russian law. 3 aircraft belonging to Chinese aircraft leasing company Avmax, leased to Russian clients, have been detained in Russia, prompting insurance payouts of $23 the Avmax type. Russia insists on Ukraine's complete withdrawal from regions claimed by Moscow as a prerequisite for peace and claims to have struck Ukrainian missile plants. China, a U.S. chip gear maker, is embroiled in a legal battle in China over alleged trade secret theft. Bridgewater has liquidated several Chinese ADRs last quarter while increasing holdings in major U.S. AI stocks. Chinese aircraft leasing company Avmax has received us $23 in insurance payouts after 3 of its planes were detained in Russia. India. Indian benchmarks remained largely unchanged as investors kept a close watch on the impending Russia-US talks. There's cautious optimism among Indian investors in anticipation of the U.S.-Russia summit. The Sensex gained 304 points, and the Nifty closed above 24,600, supported by steady U.S. inflation and the resulting global market rally. External Affairs. Minister S. Jaishankar is scheduled to visit Moscow on August 21st for discussions with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Hong Kong. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority, HKMA, intervened in the foreign exchange market for the 11th time since late June, buying local currency and absorbing interbank liquidity. The HKMA sold us $900 million and purchased the equivalent of $7.07 billion at an exchange rate of $7.85 per US dollar. The Hong Kong stock market remained relatively stable on Thursday morning, influenced by expectations of US interest rate cuts. Switzerland. A recent survey indicates that most Swiss firms are not planning to make further concessions in response to US tariffs. Swiss authorities have clarified that companies cannot circumvent US tariffs by routing operations through Liechtenstein. China's economic activity is facing headwinds and opportunities. A bond market sell-off sees futures on ultra-long debt at a 4-month low amid local stock gains. Industrial output is projected to slow down, affected by rain and capacity constraints. Unitree founder Wang Xingxing highlights that the absence of advanced AI hampers widespread robot deployment, indicating the robotics sector still awaits its ChatGPT moment. This AI deficit limits humanoid robots' environmental understanding, restricting their workplace integration. Conversely, Chinese mass-market beauty products are gaining traction overseas, undercutting established brands on price, with exports up 12% to 18.7 billion yuan, worth $60 billion in ON, primarily to the US, UK, Indonesia, Netherlands, and Japan. Apple is testing Douyin Pay in its China App Store, potentially adding a fourth payment option alongside Alipay, WeChat Pay, and China Union Pay. Applied Materials is involved in a lawsuit in China, accused of trade secret theft by a rival. China is actively engaged in international relations. China is sanctioning 2 Lithuanian banks after the EU included Chinese financial institutions in sanctions against Russia. Tensions with the US persist. China claims to have drove away a US warship near the disputed Scarborough Shoal. A Chinese warship also reportedly collided with a Chinese Coast Guard vessel during a chase of a Philippines patrol boat. Trade between China and the US is influenced by former President Trump, whose policies impact semiconductor export fees, with NVIDIA and AMD potentially sharing chip sale revenue with the Trump administration. A tariff truce previously established by the Trump administration with China remains in effect. China and India are also discussing resuming border trade, which has been paused for 5 years. China's property sector continues to struggle. Hong Kong's Road King infrastructure defaulted on US $22.60 million in interest and will defer US $56.50 million in perpetual securities distributions, becoming the first Hong Kong-based developer to default since China's property crisis began in 2021, a crisis deepened by Evergrande's delisting. In response to the EU's actions against Chinese financial institutions, China is imposing sanctions on 2 Lithuanian banks. China Scanfeng Lithium is partnering with Lithium Argentina, based in Zug, Switzerland, to consolidate 3 Argentine brine deposits in Salta province into a unified lithium extraction operation, gaining access to advanced technologies. The Philippines is experiencing ongoing tensions with China, highlighted by the Scarborough Shoal incident. Furthermore, analysts predict South Korean shipbuilders might invest in shipyards in the Philippines and Vietnam to overcome capacity limitations, labor shortages, and labor union disputes, thereby enhancing their competitiveness against China. The United States has seen growth in the smart glasses market. The market more than doubled in shipments in the first half of the year, primarily led by Meta Platforms products. Trade relations between China and the US are also influenced by the Trump administration, with President Trump playing a key role in the semiconductor industry, influencing export fees to China and NVIDIA, and AMD potentially giving the Trump administration a cut of chip sales to China. The Trump administration also extended a tariff truce with China, providing a reprieve from escalating tariffs and export controls. South Korean shipbuilders are considering investments in shipyards in the Philippines and Vietnam, aiming to mitigate constraints such as limited capacity, labor shortages, and labor union tensions, which have reduced their competitiveness against China. Hong Kong's Road King infrastructure has defaulted on US $22.60 million in interest payments and will defer distributions of US $56.56 million on perpetual securities, marking the first Hong Kong-based developer to default on bond payments since China's property crisis began in 2021. The European Union's inclusion of Chinese financial institutions in sanctions against Russia has led to retaliatory measures from China, including sanctions against two Lithuanian banks. Switzerland-based Lithium Argentina will partner with China's Ganfeng Lithium to merge three neighboring brine deposits in Argentina's Salta province into a single lithium extraction operation, facilitating access to advanced technologies. India and China are engaged in discussions about potentially resuming border trade after a 5-year suspension. India's stock markets treaded cautiously, with the BSE Sensex climbing 154.07 points and the Nifty 50 gaining 45 points. Investors initially adopted a wait-and-see approach, anticipating outcomes from U.S.-Russia talks that could affect U.S.-India trade. Gift Nifty trend signaled a subdued opening for India's benchmark index. Sumit Bagadia suggested breakout stocks, including Gujarat Apollo Industries, Vimta Labs, Skipper Ltd, India, Indian Metals and Ferroalloys, and Shilpa Medicare. The EET sector's ongoing job cuts and lackluster earnings have created investor apprehension. However, the London Stock Exchange is considering dual listings for Indian companies. JSW Cement's debut saw a $2.38 billion valuation, with a 4% gain. Perplexity integrated live Indian stock market data into its AI search tool and introduced Perplexity Finance, offering free access to Indian stock market data, possibly with Zerota's collaboration. An NSE report indicated increasing participation of women in the Indian stock market. Analysts suggest investing in defense stocks such as HAL, BEL, BEMEL, and Mazagon due to sector growth prospects fueled by government initiatives and a robust order pipeline, particularly leading up to Indian Independence Day 25. Shifting focus to Russia, Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar is scheduled to visit Moscow to engage in discussions with Lavrov, underscoring the strengthening relationship between India and Russia amidst trade friction involving the U.S. Furthermore, Indian individuals, in conjunction with other international participants, are set to receive training in Russian theater technique. Across the Atlantic in the United States, former President Trump remarked that tariffs on India's Russian oil acquisitions represent a big blow to Moscow and warned of potential future measures. South Korean shares dipped slightly in trading ahead of holiday. President Lee will soon meet with Ishiba in Japan. Lee Eok-won aims to boost South Korea's capital market. However, youth employment has declined for 15 straight months. A petrochemical sector restructuring is planned due to a grave situation. The government intends to revive its cryptocurrency market and is considering crypto reform. Bitcoin has surpassed $122,000, widening a price gap. Upbit may face business suspension for AML violation. Anduril has partnered with Korean Air for U.S. production in South Korea. Vinpearl signed a memorandum with 3 South Korean tourism firms. Kim Yoo-jong dismissed South Korea's dialogue offer as unrealistic. Asian stock markets rallied, mirroring gains in U.S. equities driven by promising inflation figures and increased anticipation of a Federal Reserve interest rate cut. Bitcoin surged to new highs amidst this positive market sentiment. The United States is facing a potential decline in international student enrollment, attributed to policies enacted by the Trump administration. These policies are prompting students to explore alternative educational pathways, including institutions like Yonsei University in Seoul. Japan's Nikkei stock market soared to unprecedented heights, briefly surpassing 43,000, fueled by a tech-driven rally spearheaded by SoftBank and buoyed by stable U.S. inflation figures. However, the Nikkei then retreated from its peak amidst growing apprehension regarding the Bank of Japan's BOJ monetary policy, and the yen's increasing strength. In other business, news from Japan, Axelspace, a microsatellite startup, witnessed its stock price surge dramatically during its initial public offering in Tokyo. Economically, Japan is projected to have experienced growth in the recent quarter. Despite the impact of tariffs on the nation's trade, Vietnam is embarking on ambitious economic reforms, aspiring to join the ranks of Asia's tiger economies. Central to this strategy, the State Bank of Vietnam intends to lower reserve ratios for banks that acquire struggling financial institutions. Complementing these monetary maneuvers, South Korea's Dunamu is collaborating with MB Bank to introduce Vietnam's inaugural cryptocurrency exchange, further solidifying its relationship with South Korea. Top leaders from both Vietnam and South Korea observed the signing of significant cooperation agreements. In related business news, FPT Corporation is expanding its alliances, concentrating on the semiconductor industry and the development of a highly skilled workforce. Saigon Tourist also has plans to promote Vietnam as a premier location for South Korean MICE tourism. Understood. I await your news articles. I will synthesize them according to the specifications you have outlined. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.